the guy. I mean, he's the sailor. And Heidi, I think we'll have a great show. I mean, there's a lot involved with sailing, and
Yeah,
I
sounds
love
like
the
it.
sea. Well, I love the sea. I don't know whether you know about my background, but I grew up
Oh,
on a boat,
yes.
basically.
Yes, I've heard.
Oh, okay. Well, I didn't know I mentioned all that too. But did I tell
Yeah.
you at one time when I was thinking about escaping Phyllis, uh, I was offered a job as third mate on an ocean-going tug for Shell. I don't know if I ever told you about that. But see, I had so much nautical background through my life that the guy that was a port captain, which is like an admiral or something, for Shell, he was going to start me as a third mate, and I'd been a captain within a year. But can you imagine how exciting that would have been? This would have been in the North. This would have been in the North Sea. You know, you've seen those pictures where the tug goes up and down those giant troughs, and of course it's cold as all get out. And would that be
Deadliest
exciting?
Catch, I think that show's called, something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But now this would be for Shell, but I'd be making $250,000 a year right now if I'm still doing it. And of course, Shell has great benefits. I didn't because I wanted to raise my daughter and all that stuff and be proximate to her. But they work 3 weeks on in the North Sea and 1 week off, so they fly back home to the United States for 1 week off. But at any rate, I've had a lot of, and through my whole life, I was always in the, piloting boats and stuff. But I've always had a fascination with it, and I think everybody will too. There's a lot of exciting formats you find yourself in. A lot of weird stuff happens out on the water, and it's kind of like one big adventure. So
it's like undiscovered planet because there's so much that we don't know about our oceans. So I find it like a big mystery.
We really don't. And under the oceans, you really know nothing. I mean, there's creatures that look like something out of a science fiction movie, but no.
Exactly.
There's an incredible amount about the oceans. I'm glad you brought that up. People do not know. Now, I want to tell the folks that, we might talk about a couple things, but towards the end of the 10-minute news segment, we're going to run an EVP.
Mm-hmm.
And what it is it's a gal I know named Sarah. I won't say her last name for her own anonymity's sake. I mean, I didn't get an okay to say who she was. But at any rate, Sarah and her family were living in a haunted house. And it was kind of scary because her son would wake up in terror, daughter the same way. And she was actually grabbed by a ghost, I suppose, in a sexual manner. And a team came in to investigate. A medium picked up spirits of 2 brothers and ostensibly made them cross over. And still there was a third spirit of an old buzzard hanging around the house.
Huh.
And made many attempts at picking up an EVP, and then she picked up this EVP. And it's a musical one. It's just different. It's just something different. And towards the end of the show, I'll give you all the high sign that we'll play the EVP, and then we'll run it through twice. It's 22 seconds, so it'll be a 44-second listening session. But I think it's something different, hon. It's just...
Yeah. I used to not be able to listen to whispery EVP voices. They just freaked me out because I've heard too many personally, in real life. I just couldn't listen to them. But musical? Okay, we could do that.
Well, it's not too bad. But at any rate, I don't go for the demonic or anything like that. But I don't emphasize this as being necessarily demonic, but it's definitely weird. And I thought y'all might find this interesting. But I didn't, I told you off the air that I had a little bird encounter. I'm always having these little bird encounters. And I rent a lot of cars. I rent once or twice a month just to keep miles off my regular rides. Because I drive the pants off of them, Heidi. Enterprise Leasing hopefully isn't listening. But I drive. By the way, I love Enterprise Leasing, and they love me. But at one time when I was working for State Farm, I used to have 30 people a week in a rent car for Enterprise. 30 different claimants. So
wow.
They were going to make a bronze plaque to me somewhere. But what happened is this. I go to Walmart, and I feed the birds. But you would figure since I'm in different vehicles all the time, they wouldn't know who was, I mean, understand there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. This Walmart does Heidi, sometimes 1 million in a day. It's that busy. So around the holidays, I mean, they're one of the biggest matter of fact, I heard them clapping themselves on the back today when I was in there. They're the number one in the region or something. But what I'm saying is there's hundreds of cars. So as far as the birds, if I was driving my silver Ford truck, you could say, well, they'd key into that, right? But no. But I mean, this is just a little black Chevy I'm renting right now. And I usually rent other kinds of vehicles. And there's no way they should have been able to key into that. But before I got out of the door, the birds were lining up to get fed. I'm not saying this is dramatic as an EVP or something, but it is bizarre.
Yeah, that is wild.
And it's the same parking lot as that crow who I told you about a year ago. He just lit on top of the door frame and
it's at the same place.
Yakking the act for 2 minutes with me, like, here's what happened, blah 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 blah. It's been a hard day in the little format here, and blah 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 blah. And that's exactly what happened.
Wow.
So I don't know. I mean, it's not bad. It's good. I seem to have a rapport with animals, but this was a little strange. I mean, you could see if they actually seen me to get out and say, "Oh, that's the old bird feeder guy." Okay, but they were lining up before I even opened the door. They didn't know me. I could have been a big fat woman or something. They wouldn't know. I mean, they had no physical features to distinguish.
Right.
Anyway, I don't know.
They have a sixth sense, they say. So animals are interesting.
Well, I guess we better get to the EVP now. Once again, folks, Sarah said there was no musical background, no way music could emanate from anything, no radios, no players of any kind.
It'd be cool to find out from what era that song comes from.
I haven't the vaguest idea. I don't know enough about music to stick in my ear, but no, that's definitely what happened, and I don't know. It's great to be back with Heidi, and we've got excellent guest and Captain Kelly Sweeney. He's a master mariner. He holds the highest captain's license issued by the Coast Guard. He graduated from the California Maritime Academy in 1983 with a bachelor's in nautical industrial technology. He's worked on tankers, oceanographic ships, passenger vessels, ocean-going tugboats, and crew boats. He's a columnist for the Professional Mariner magazine, and author of From the Bridge, personal stories of modern merchant marine life, and he operates Maritime Headhunters, a job placement agency featuring featured speaker at various conferences. Captain, you're just a heck of a guy.
Well, ahoy, Kevin. It's great being back with you on the Kevin Cook Show. And Heidi, I haven't had a chance to talk with you, but I'm looking forward to this evening. Thanks for having me back on.
Well, Heidi lives in the great seafaring capital of, she's from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. but anybody that... I'm sorry?
Well, I was going to say, Kevin, the Great Lakes are a fantastic group of mariners working on there. My dad actually started on the Great Lakes as what was called a coal passer, and back when most of the ships were steam powered. And he started there. He worked his way up, and then he ended up going offshore ultimately. But so the Great Lakes have a great nautical tradition, and so good mariners from there.
There you go. Ha.
Well, that's my girl. Well, I told her my story, how I had the third mate job opportunity. But what always tickled me, I told you, we talked about this on the phone, but Heidi, my father was on a volunteer basis. He worked for the Coast Guard in South Florida, and he was actually in charge of getting teachers to teach boating courses to the community, and staffing teachers at these various locations for the Coast Guard. And he would hobnob with a lot of admirals. And Captain Sweeney, he asked them, this is during the Bermuda Triangle period, where there's a big emphasis on it. Charles Fritz's book came out. And they told him, in all honesty, 10% of disappearances and cases had a weird twist to them that there was no legitimate explanation. The Coast Guard would come up on a vessel and it'd say a cigarette would be burning in an ashtray. It might take maybe 10 minutes, and yet there's no sign of life, no blood or sign of a struggle. And even in the 70s, the Coast Guard boats could, see 10 miles around it in the air, on the surface, or even under the water. So what do you make of that, Captain? What the heck is going on out there?
Well, the Bermuda Triangle has been an enigma for hundreds of years. This is true.
Yeah.
I will say that having been through the Bermuda Triangle, transiting a number of times, I'm not 100% sure about the esoteric possibility that 10% of the ships just disappear for whatever reason. But then again,
right.
Who knows? I will say that there are mysteries on the sea, Kevin, that can't be explained. I was on a ship one time on a tanker in the middle of the North Pacific, and we received, the captain received word that a distress call from another ship had been received about 25 miles from where we were. Oh. And so he came up to the bridge. I was on watch, and he said, head for this position right here. And then he got everybody going. The engineers were putting the steam to the ship. And anyway, my job was to be on the bridge wing as we got closer, scanning the horizon with binoculars. And as we got closer, I didn't see any ship there. There was no ship, but there was an enormous whirlpool about a mile in diameter. And
what? Wow.
Yeah.
That would scare you a little bit.
That's right. This is the middle of the North Pacific, okay? And so I told the captain, he goes, whoa. And so he starts, it takes about 2 miles on a ship like that to stop, going full speed. But he changed course. He brought her back, brought the throttle back, and we were stopped there at a safe distance. And this enormous whirlpool was right there in the position where the distress call was received, and there was not any sign there was no debris, there was no oil slick, there were no people, survivors in lifeboats. There was nothing. The only thing that I saw, all of us saw, was an orange hard hat that was moving in the swirl of this whirlpool, and ultimately got into the vortex. It got sucked down to the bottom of Davy Jones' locker, and that was the only thing.
What is it? The idea that maybe the distress call? Did maybe the distress call go off before the ship?
It was a distress call. The authorities got it, and they relayed the position to us, and that ship was never, ever heard from again. That was the last thing that was heard from that ship.
What on earth causes such a whirlpool? I mean, no one flushed the toilet. What is that? That's just like a black hole.
I don't have a clue, but it's funny, Heidi. Yeah. There are a lot of things that happen, and like the disappearances in the Mariner Triangle, or this whirlpool, or many other phenomena that happen at sea some of which I've seen firsthand, that are definitely have always been considered to be tall mariners' tales. But now with satellite imagery, it's been proven by scientists that enormous whirlpools exist throughout the Earth. In the oceans in different areas of the Earth. An enormous one was found off of South America once. And scientists are beginning to postulate that what these whirlpools do is mix the cold and warm ocean water in the oceans. They're basically a funnel that churns the cold and warm water and mixes it. And that's one theory, but nothing has ever been proved.
Wow. So there's none that happened on the Great Lakes then, I'm assuming.
Well, there are definitely different phenomena on the Great Lakes that are peculiar to that area. Matter of fact, in my opinion, the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald was caused by one of these unusual phenomena.
Oh, gosh. Huh. It's wild stuff.
It's not a whirlpool, but the Edmund Fitzgerald, now, I'm sure that being from the Midwest, you've heard of the Edmund Fitzgerald, and of course everybody's heard that song by Gordon Lightfoot, The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Okay? That was what that song was describing, was the night that ship went down. And what I believe happened in that is that a rare circumstance of 3 rogue waves that happened very quickly, called the Three Sisters, in that area, and with those exact weather conditions. And the ship was already getting hammered, but I believe that the first rogue wave washed over the ship and slammed in the center of it, probably knocking off some hatch covers and reducing the watertight integrity of the ship or eliminating it. The second one came, washed over it, and started to cause structural damage to the ship and basically break it apart. And I think the third one did them in. And the Three Sisters are what this called are 3 rogue waves, and they're unique to the Great Lakes. You don't find that situation anywhere else in the world. And the verification that I have for that was a ship that was about 10 miles away that didn't go down that night. The captain of that vessel reported 3 rogue waves within a matter of minutes before the Edmund Fitzgerald went down. And so that's my theory.
Terrible. Yeah.
So strange things happen all over the world, in inland waters and often in the oceans. They happen all the time.
It sounds like it.
Let me tell you one quick. I know we're going to have lots of stories, Captain, tonight, but let me tell you a real quickie that a guy told me. He was petty officer of the watch on a naval carrier that was going from Galveston to Pensacola. And what happened was they saw the running lights of a ship off in the distance from the carrier. And of course, that made them all excited because there's only so many carriers, and they're very important vessels and all that. And the radar and all that could pick up pleasure craft and other vessels and so forth. But 300 guys on the deck of this carrier saw the running lights of a giant ship, and it didn't show up on radar or anything else. And the Pentagon was even going bats about what was going on with it. You ever hear anything like that? Or
I sure have, and I think what happened is probably. Do you know what time of year that was, Kevin?
No, I don't.
Was it in the winter?
He told me. I really don't. I mean, he was petty officer of the watch, but I mean that's all I know about that. But as far as he didn't indicate it was very cold. But then again, in the Gulf, I would figure it'd be kind of warm anyway, wouldn't it?
Well, what a lot of people don't realize, a lot of landlubbers don't realize, is that the mirages that people see, like when you're driving in the desert and on a hot day and you see that rippling on the road and it looks like there's water on there. Well, a lot of people don't realize that there are mirages at sea too. I think what probably happened on that one is what we call a superior image mirage, and that's caused by temperature differences and actually an inversion of cold and warm air. And an old friend of mine who's now retired, Ted, he was captain for many years. When he was a young man just starting out, he was on the lookout, just like your friend here. Yeah. And although he was on a merchant ship. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, on a collision course, here comes this enormous ship heading right at him. The officer of the watch is freaking out. It doesn't show up on radar. He's calling the ship. Nobody answers. He calls the captain. The captain comes up, and they look at it, and the captain says, "Well, I think you just saw your first superior image mirage right there, Mr. Mate." And what that causes is that a vessel, what that allows is a vessel that's below the horizon. It enables, the conditions are just right that the light is, the image is refracted, that you can see it above the horizon down in another part of the ocean. And it looks like it's coming right at you, and what it really is a mirror, is an image. And most of the time, that image is upside down. But in the superior mirage image, in the right conditions, it's right side up, and it looks like a ship coming right at you. And then all of a sudden,
that was probably it. Good deal.
Yep. And all of a sudden, it'll disappear. A lot of people remember the famous
ships.
Lost Dutchman. You've heard of the Lost Dutchman. I
Flying.
think that's
yeah, I have.
I think I think that's.
I wonder if today they had a mirage tsunami because. That earthquake that hit over in Alaska was at 7.8, and they were recording on a buoy a 38-foot waves coming, and they put an alert on the whole West Coast for the tsunami to hit because they'd measured the waves and then nothing. I mean, that's like a mirage. I mean, what is that? It's so weird.
Well, it could have been absorbed, or maybe the tsunami went and crossed the path where the buoy was, and was able to record it. But maybe it spread out and didn't follow maybe the curve of the coast. Maybe it's further offshore. A tsunami offshore, we don't even notice a tsunami out at sea. Tsunami is Japanese. Tsunami is Japanese for harbor wave. And a tsunami is only dangerous when it comes into the harbor and then it hits land and it rises up with the contour of the bottom, and then it's a danger to people ashore. At sea, we won't even. It's just another wave. We don't even notice them. But talking about tsunamis, I have a good friend who used to work up back in the day for an outfit called Alaska Steamship, and in Valdez, I believe it was 63 or 64. I think it was 64. There was like a 9-point-something earthquake that was centered right in Valdez, and which is the terminus of the North Slope with the Alaska pipeline, and it's where we load Alaska crude there in Valdez. Well, the old city basically got wiped out by the earthquake, but it was centered right in Valdez, which essentially is in kind of a bowl, and the mountains rise right up out of the water, way up, huge mountains in Alaska. This tsunami was generated, and it was a 110-foot tsunami.
Oh my goodness!
And he was on the ship. Yep, 110 feet, 11 stories high, and he was on the ship at the time. And it was but it hit the vessel. The vessel was tied up at the dock where it was unloading cargo, and of course they stopped everything when the earthquake damaged everything. The tsunami came and it lifted the ship up over a warehouse that was right on the dock, set it down on the shore on the other side of the warehouse. We're talking about a 400 or 500 foot ship.
Jeez.
And then on the backwash of the tsunami coming down the hill, it picked it back up again, brought it over the warehouse, and set it back down on the other side again. And a couple people, longshoremen died, but everybody on board, the crew, a couple people got hurt, but nobody died. So tsunamis are the real deal, but they're a harbor wave, and you're not going to get slammed with them unless you're in the harbor.
Goodness, that's nuts.
That would be a seriously exciting deal. That would be just
wow.
Yeah.
Can you imagine that sitting there and you're sleeping in your bed, and all of a sudden, whoa, what am I doing on this side of the? And then all of a sudden, here's this big wall of water, and whoa, I'm going back the other way.
That makes all my little maritime experiences seem pretty mild manner. Of course, I didn't have that many. I mean, I'm just a civilian, but I'm just saying that that tsunami thing blows your mind.
Well, Kevin, we're civilians too, Kevin. Merchant mariners are not military. We're not military.
Right.
Right, but I'm just saying, the sea is not for the faint-hearted. It's not for people who dismiss its power. And the sea has, regardless of how long you've been out there, has mysteries and surprises for you, regardless of how long you've been out. And as mariners, our job is to just kind of work through them. That's what we do.
Oh man, that would be so exciting, though. My goodness. But I don't know. I should have said not civilian, but layman. But things could happen quickly as far as storms and what have you, I guess, because it builds up heat. But I remember one time, I was just a kid. I was like 12, and we were coming out of the area of the Bahia Mar Marina, and just taking the boat out for a spin. And it was a beautiful day, sunny, all of that. And Captain, within 15 minutes, we were in 25-foot waves. And I don't know how it even came up so quickly. And, I was just a kid. I was saying, Dad, this is really great, And he was having to cut between the troughs, at an angle so he didn't get swamped. And, he says, great. Yeah, great. But I guess it But, I mean, are tropical waters, they're that changeable, I guess?
Actually, to tell you the truth, Kevin, the ocean is unpredictable in all waters. I mean, the worst weather that I've ever experienced was not in warm climes, but way up north. But the conditions change on the ocean so quickly that Well, for example, there's a lot of old mnemonic sayings that mariners have used, rhymes, like red sky at night, sailor's delight, red sky at morning, sailor take warning. Yeah. Everybody's heard that one, but those have a basis in fact. I mean, and that particular one is because most of our weather, at least in the northern hemisphere, comes from the west. When you have clear weather, which is red sky at night, you can see the nice weather to the west of you as the sun sets. That is a good sign because that's portending nice weather coming your way. If you see red sky in the morning, that weather is already to your east, which means the bad weather is coming in. So there's a basis in fact for that. And so mariners use those experiential mnemonics, memory aids, to remember different things. So, for example, a few nights ago here in Seattle, we had a huge ring around the moon. And I told my wife, I said, well, we're going to get rain probably tomorrow. And she goes, really? And I said, ring around the sun or moon means rain or snow is coming soon. And sure enough, the next day it was a deluge. And so the ocean, those things came up because mariners used those experiences to help those who followed put together what they were seeing with what they were seeing, what it meant. If all of a sudden the wind shifts in a strange way, or it goes a certain direction, counterclockwise or clockwise when you're out at sea, you know for a fact, and there's a hurricane or something, a large storm either coming your way or moving away from you. So,
Next time, just freak your wife out and just say you're psychic.
Well, I think she knows me better than that I'm not psychic. I think she knows me better than I'm not psychic.
Oh, darn.
But this was just so strange because, it was just a guy taking his kid out on a boat, and it looked sunny and nice like it always did down there. And, within 20, 25 minutes, we were in 25-foot waves because I know we must have been, 10 or 12 foot above the water line on the flying bridge on about a 42-foot Chris craft, I would think, wouldn't you think? 10 to 15 foot above the water line? I'd say 15 foot.
Well, the weather can change so fast, like Heidi's from the Midwest, and the Great Lakes are notorious for having, like when you get a strong front going through from Canada on down across the Great Lakes, all the anglers, boaters, and commercial mariners know what the signs are with the clouds and the way the wind shifts, what's coming in, and how fast it can come. And I think that the person that you were out there with, you were really lucky to get back in, and it's good that he was able to navigate that. But there are definitely, in all parts of the world, and that's where local knowledge comes in, to be aware of some change like that and how quick it's going to happen. Up in Alaska, there's a thing called a willy waw, and basically it's a very fast wind that occurs that basically rolls down the mountains on generally a relatively comparatively warm mass of air, and will sweep down there, and within a matter of minutes you're going to have hurricane force winds. Ooh. And then maybe 3 or 4 hours later, boom, they'll be gone.
Oh, we get things. We get things like lake effect snow and madness like that. Like we've had surprise blizzards. It's like, how do you not see a blizzard coming?
Yeah, that doesn't seem right to have a surprise blizzard.
It's the Great Lakes. It just dumps things on us. It's so bizarre. But I'm in Chicago now.
Yeah, well, Chicago definitely has it, and that's a maritime town, a good maritime town.
Big
but
time.
The Great Lakes, and that's why and I know a number of friends of mine who work on the Great Lakes, and I said my dad started there. That you really have to know your stuff because the weather will change very quickly. Weather and being a mariner at sea are so intertwined compared to the average person. The average person looks at the Weather Channel. Oh, it's going to rain today. And the most that it happened, they might bring an umbrella or they might dress a little differently. But out at sea, we look at weather reports with the idea that if we make a mistake, this can cost our life.
Right.
And a good example of that is the El Faro, which is the American cargo ship that went down in late 2015 in Hurricane Joaquin, and lost 33 hands. All hands on board perished. And one of the findings from that, and it was the worst U.S. maritime disaster in decades, probably since the Edmund Fitzgerald or close to it, that it came out. The investigation came out that the captain, especially, ignored very pertinent and very timely weather information regarding that hurricane's path, and he sailed his vessel right into the path of that hurricane to their demise. So out at sea, it's not a matter of just what are we going to wear that day, or do I have to put an extra scarf on? And I'm not minimizing it. You can die just as easily in a blizzard, on the highway.
Right.
But for a mariner, it's life and death. And we look at the weather with a view of like, what are we going to come into? What are we going to have to face? And when you're out there, of course, you can't call anybody to help you. It's not like you're on the side of the road and you call AAA or the police come and get you. If there's a fire or the ship starts breaking up in the middle of the hurricane, there's no 911 to call. It's us, and that's all there is.
Wow. Captain, I don't know if you've heard much about the secret space program that is said to be going on with our government, but I'm telling you, if there was a choice of who I'd want behind the wheel going into uncharted territory, it would be someone like yourself, because you take in all the signs and you know how to anticipate the worst case scenario. I mean, geez, it sounds
that.
like
I appreciate that, Heidi. But I don't know much about space, and so I'm not sure I'd be able to.
Neither do we. Neither does this planet. That's why we need somebody like you, because the ocean is kind of like uncharted territory. I mean, there's so much we don't know about it, and here this blue planet is mostly made of water. So you are like, most of this planet than most people.
Well, this is true. As a matter of fact, I worked with one of the most famous oceanographers in the world, a guy named John Delaney, who is world-renowned. And he told me one time, I was a chief officer on a science ship. He told me once, he said, Kelly, he goes, we know more about the moons of Saturn than we know about the oceans on the Earth.
I've heard that.
Oh, yeah.
I've heard that, actually.
Oh, yeah.
And I believe that, and I believe that's true. And I've heard that from other famous scientists that I've worked with on those ships as well. And so that's what their oceanographers are doing out there, is to try to figure out, like, for example, we were talking about last segment, that huge whirlpool that I saw in the North Pacific. And now the scientists have found out through satellite imagery that they're a lot more common than people realize, like rogue waves. For a long time, rogue waves were nothing more than the stuff of fairy tales. As a matter of fact, the first captain I ever worked with was he was a nice old guy, an old timer, but he got his start on what was called back in the day lumber schooners, and they were smaller, maybe 300-400 foot vessels that what we call stick ships. They use booms that went in and out of the smaller ports on the West Coast. Instead of the big ones like Seattle or Portland, they'd go like to Coos Bay or Newport or someplace small like that, picking up and taking off cargo. He was on the when he started, he was on the wheel as a seaman, and he said off of Coos Bay one day, it was rough, but all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this enormous wave rose out of the ocean and covered his entire ship. It slammed the wheelhouse windows and blew the windows in, destroyed the entire wheelhouse windows. One shard of glass got impaled in his forehead. It stuck right in his forehead.
Oh, hell. Wow.
But I can tell you, he was a hard-headed old guy, and so luckily he made it through. Not to make light of it, but he made light of it. But I noticed the scar, and that's where when I worked with him, and he told me the story. But that was a rogue wave. And he told me, he goes, Kelly, don't let anybody tell you that there's no such thing as rogue waves. But at the time, that was before scientists had verified the existence of rogue waves. That didn't happen for 20 years later until the North Sea. There was a recording on a rig, a Dropner rig, that recorded a rogue wave. It wasn't until that time, 20 years after, actually at this point, that's when I started, the experience that he had, it was probably 50 years, that verified that rogue waves exist. For all before that, and I've talked to some scientists, and I said, you guys didn't listen to us when we told you about this. And they said, yeah, you're right, we didn't. And so I think more and more they're finding that what mariners have said are happening out there. Hey, we know the oceans. This is where we spend our lives. And so the scientists are now believing us, too, that, yes, rogue waves do exist. Huge whirlpools out in the ocean do exist. Strange weather changes exist. I mean, it's just that's the environment we live in.
So then where's the mermaids? You guys got a lot of stories, so I want to hear.
Well, I don't know about the mermaids.
Well, I'm not sure about the mermaids either, but I'm sure they've led more than one mariner astray. A good-looking woman who can sing. Okay, that's the end of it. They were
probably
jumping over the side.
Oh yeah. Well, now, Captain, wasn't it so? Weren't these rogue waves? A lot of people speculated that's to a certain extent responsible for some of the Bermuda Triangle issues and disappearances.
Well, I think that's certainly possible. Rogue waves occur throughout the world, and actually, again, with satellite imagery, the satellite imagery has really helped because you can see the big picture, which in the past, before that, we really never could. That rogue waves occur far more frequently than anybody ever realized. And that they're actually a relatively regular occurrence, but because most of the time, people don't deal with it. The ships, there's not, ships in there, or they just ride over it or whatever. And so, I would say that it's the truth that the phenomena that occur at sea are now coming out of the realm of tall tales and sea stories and becoming scientific fact.
Even the giant squid.
Probably true.
Giant squid have been found. I mean, they've been found now.
That's true. There have been giant squid. There have been sea creatures that have come up. And so
it's wild. I dig it.
Well, one thing in retrospect, I can honestly say now that the more I look at it, I'm surprised I made it through to adulthood because. Okay, now here's a guy that's doing all this stuff as far as supposed to be a knowledgeable seaman and hiring instructors for the Coast Guard and all that. How could Dad run aground so much? They had depth finders back then. I mean, was he lightheaded or what? I mean, he was run aground in this guy I ever seen in my life. He even disappeared
I think that, there's it's a pretty sandy bottom over there, Kevin, and so there might be some changes. In the bottom in certain places, silting that occurs and builds it up, and then the waves and whatever, the wave action changes that, and they pile up elsewhere. The Columbia River is known for that. You talk to people who spent their life on the river, and they'll say, hey, the river changes all the time, every day, different seasons and how much it's flowing. There's sandbars one day, and then 2 weeks later, there's no sandbar there. So. Yeah, I mean, I don't blame him. I think that for something like that, that could happen easily. What I think is bad is when you have people who go to sea and they are not prepared for the possibilities that they are aware of. They don't have the proper life jackets, so they don't have the right equipment. Or in a commercial.
Oh no, we always had that. That we always had. We always had that.
As long as you have that, I mean, that's prudent.
But I guess I just didn't understand with all the depth finders he had and all that. It seemed like, he shouldn't have had to worry about it. But one time he got stranded. He ran aground for about 2 days till he got off wherever he was at down in the Caribbean. But
that'll happen. I mean, I've known people that have run aground and then they have to wait for the next tide. So they're sitting there and everybody's laughing at them or whatever and saying, okay, and then when the tide comes back in, they can get out of there.
So in other words, don't be too harsh in my retrospective opinions.
No, don't be too hard on him. No, I mean he wasn't a sailor by trade, so no problem.
Yeah.
There's some couple of questions in the chat room. Somebody's asking, and I get it. How can a big airliner be lost in the ocean? It's a big ocean. It's easy to lose stuff, but how do tankers and whatnot get lost?
Well, you mean like they go down and they're missing forever? Is that what they're?
Like the airliner. What was it?
That's MH377 or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, I would say that 1,000-foot ship, and I've been on a 1,000-foot ship. I worked on a number of 1,000-footers. Looks really big. Okay, we're talking like 5 football, 3, 4 football fields long.
Right.
It looks really big when you're at the dock. But when you're out at sea, it looks really small. And when you're in a huge weather system, you realize how puny and small you really are, and how Neptune, the king of the seas, you hopefully will keep him in a good mood as you go along, because if anybody has seen the power of a hurricane, and I was in Hurricane Iniki in '94 in Hawaii, the power of a hurricane or the power of a severe storm, that ship becomes much smaller, and it is your only lifeline to survival. If there's nothing else keeping you alive but what you're doing with that ship.
Yeah. Oh, it's amazing.
So how they can be like that ship, they had the distress signal, and we went to that point and it was gone. Ships will sink sometimes in a matter of 2 minutes. The
really?
Estonia.
Wow.
There was a famous wreck over in the Baltic Sea in the mid-'90s. The Estonia had lost 800, I think around 800 passengers died in that terrible tragedy. But it went down, it was in a matter of 2 minutes. And it's not unusual for, and the people in that particular case, the passengers, some of them died, didn't even get out of their bed. They died in their staterooms in their bed. The investigators found later. So there have been 1,000-foot, 1,200-foot ships, bulk carriers laden with some kind of ore or coal or whatever, and they'll split open at sea, and the entire ship sinks so fast that the people don't even have time to get up and get in their survival suit, let alone launch a lifeboat. So how do ships disappear like that? Well, it happens. It can happen very quickly. You can have a 1,000-foot ship go down in a matter of minutes, and it happens regularly. There are hundreds of ships of varying sizes lost every year. Not all big ones.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, they're lost.
Hey, I've got one for you. I've got one for you, Captain. I've got one for you, Captain. My brother was not my oldest brother, but middle brother, was a sonar man for the Navy back in the 70s. And he said that the sonar guys frequently saw, they knew the fastest Russian sub would go like 60 miles an hour at the time. And it had a distinctive sound signature, okay? He saw, and other sonar men saw stuff that was going 100 miles an hour, 40 miles an hour faster than the fastest Russian sub, soundlessly. And he said it happened, and they were basically told, don't even write it up in the report, to shut up about it. I mean, and this guy, he was no idiot. He was in the Navy for 6 years, and he wound up being a GS-15. So he's good at what he did. But all sonar men know this. What do you think about that?
Oh, I would say that there's no question that with 7/10 of the Earth being covered by water, how can anybody say that we have a handle on what's going on? As Delaney told me that time, that scientist, we know more about the planets in the outer space than we do, of the ocean. And so your brother, to see those strange anomalies, I don't think that's unusual at all. I think that there's a lot of things that can't be explained, but because they're either, maybe because we don't necessarily want to find out, right? Or, or it happens one time and then we ignore it. They just go by. I'll tell you a story, and I don't know if we have time, but I'll tell you a story about an unusual.
We got time before the top of the hour break. Yeah, we got time.
Okay, I'll tell you a story that I don't think I've ever told on the air, but I was a junior officer on a tanker one time. This was in the early '90s, and we were off of what's now called Haida Gwaii. It used to be called the Queen Charlotte Islands off of British Columbia, on the way back up to Valdez. And we were on a 900-foot ship, and I was a junior officer, so I was on watch with a sailor as a lookout, and we were just cruising along. And all of a sudden, up in the sky, there's like this enormously brilliant light. It looked like a supernova. And the sailor on my watch goes, "Look at that!" And I went and I looked, and I went, "My goodness, what is that?" And the next thing you know, this thing's coming right at us. It almost looked like it was a missile or something heading right at us. He's getting ready to jump over the side. He goes, "Kelly, I'm jumping over. It's gonna." I said, "Please don't do that." I said, "Number one, we're 140 feet above the water. You're probably not going to make it. Number two, I'm going to have to spend the rest of my watch searching for you, so don't jump." And so anyway, the next thing you know, the light comes down.
I like your reasoning.
That's right. I didn't want to spend I love the guy. He was a great guy. And I told him, I said, the bottom line is I don't want to lose you, and I don't want to spend all the rest of my watch looking for you. So anyway, this thing comes down, and it turned out to be the traditional UFO that people have heard about. There's flames coming out the bottom. There's these red and yellow lights circling around the bottom, and there's flames. And I go, whoa.
Wow.
So the first thing I did was I went over to the radar because I thought, I wonder if that thing is real. Or maybe I've been out at sea too long and I should get off in the next port. So I go over, and sure enough, it's on radar. It's going the same speed we are. We were going 15.2 knots, which is pretty much our 15.2 to 15.5 was our light speed, and we were light in ballast heading back up to Alaska. And so we were going. It was going 15.2. It was keeping about 2 miles from us, and the same height above the horizon. Now, of course, it was night. It was hard to see, but I'm guessing it was probably a mile above the water, thereabouts. And it was going with us, and it did that for long enough that I called the captain. And the captain was an old-timer, been around a long time, and I tell you, he was a crotchety old guy. I have to admit, he was the typical, oh, my gosh, I don't really want to work with this guy. But, of course, we were stuck with him. But I didn't want to call him, but I had no choice. A good mate, if they don't see what's going on, has to call the captain. So I call him, and he comes up, and he goes, what in the world is that? And I said, I don't know. But I had heard that aliens abduct people, so I was trying to do some kind of telepathy with the aliens and say, please take him. Please take the old guy to my
He
right.
needs to be abducted right today.
Leave the young guy, the sailor. Leave me. Take the old guy. Not because he's old, but because he was a real pain in the neck, and the first officer was much better. Would have been a much nicer captain. Unfortunately, even the aliens didn't want him, so he stayed on the bridge. And after about 2 minutes, that flame, the light started twirling again, around the bottom. The flames came up, and all of a sudden, boom! It went right back up to the sky in the same place where the supernova, or whatever it looked like a supernova, was in the sky. And so I told the captain, I said, well, what do you want me to log on that? And he goes, just put unidentified lights in this position, and that's all. Wow. And he goes, otherwise they'll take us off in straitjackets in Valdez. And so, anyway. I've thought about that for years, and I will say that was an area where the Canadians would always come and check the identity of a ship. And when I first started my career, they'd have a boat that would come out. Who are you, and what's your purpose out here, kind of thing. Okay. And then they'd have these C-130 planes, or big prop job planes flying over, and you knew they were just checking us and seeing who we were. Yeah. So my thought was that this might have been a drone. But now this was, of course, 26 years ago, 27 years ago.
That'd be a little pre-drone time, I guess.
But I think it was a drone, and they came down to check us out, see who we were, and then went back up. That's my theory, anyway. But I've had contact with that seaman, that able seaman, on my watch since then, and he swears it was aliens, but they just rejected the captain, and that's why they left. So.
Well, Doug, my brother, actually did say that it was not just an isolated anomaly. All sonar men are experiencing. This was in the Pacific too, by the way. But it just happened, and don't even write it up in the report because they don't want to hear any sass, and just like they do with conventional UFOs. But they knew that a whale would go 30 miles an hour under the water at best, and the Russian sub with a very noisy sound signature would go 60, but this was, like I say, 100, and soundlessly. So it was a weird deal. It really was.
Yeah,
well, he... Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Kev.
Well, I tell you what, we're coming right up to our top of the hour break, and we'll take that, and we'll be right back with some more good stories. We'll be right back.
You're listening to IRN, the Inception Radio Network, Chicago, Illinois.
Makes ghost stuff look like, warm pudding or something like that. But we're talking. I got
a ghost story that happened on a ship too, Kevin.
Ooh.
Oh, okay. Well, that would make it better than the regular ghost story.
Okay. Well, I was on this. I was on this ship, and I think we were in Los Angeles or Long Beach, and in port. We still the ship, the ship works 24/7, 365, whether you're at the dock or whether you're out at sea. And so the ship was working cargo, but I was on watch, and so I decided to go down in the engine room to do a little bit of safety stuff. I had to check some extinguishers and do some other things while we were in port, and so I took advantage of that while we were there. And it was later at night. It wasn't real late, but it was maybe 10 or 11 at night. And everybody else was doing something different. There were a few engineers down in the engine room, but they were in a completely different area. And I was the one who was working, who was on watch up top, the night mate. And so I was down there in the engine room basically by myself, and all of a sudden, man, it turned really cold. And I'm talking like freezing cold. And I'm like, whoa. I mean, I was in Los Angeles, and I'm like, what is this, And then I got this weird feeling like the hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt like I was being watched. And so I kind of looked around and said, hey, I thought there might have been one of the engineers or, maybe one of the seamen on my watch came down to talk to me about something. And all of a sudden, this bang dropped down. It sounded like somebody dropped something on a metal grate. I turned around, startled, but I didn't see anything.
Wow.
And then I got this weird vibe, and there was this strange noise, almost like something going back and forth, hanging and swinging back and forth, like that. Oh, and that freaked me out, man. That was the end of it. I was completely freaked out, and I ran up out of the bottom of that ship. I was at the bottom of the ship. I ran out of there I couldn't believe I moved that fast. And I got up on deck, and I'm like, whew. And I was telling one of the engineers about it the next day. I said, man, that was just too weird. And he goes, whereabout was that you heard that? And I told him, and he goes, Kelly, he goes, a couple years ago, there was an engineer on here. I think it was a third engineer. And he had got a Dear John letter from the love of his life. And he hung himself in that location.
Oh, great.
Of the engine room. And he told me that other people had heard noises in that area, but nobody was going to say anything because they didn't want to get, as the captain, that old timer said, they didn't get taken off in a straitjacket in the next port. So nobody ever said anything. Well, it was just my imagination or just the wind or whatever it might have been.
Wow.
But so anyway, that's what I heard, and that scared the heck out of me. I tell you what.
Yeah, I bet.
It would me too. It would me too.
There was a question when we were talking about the UFOs. People were asking in the chat room if you'd seen USOs, which are submerged unidentified objects. So,
I think that's
have you seen UFOs go in and out of the water or not? Or
yeah, I have not personally seen that, but I've heard of a couple guys who said that they saw some kind of. They thought it was some kind of space debris or something that is just coming down into the atmosphere, but flaming and going down into the ocean. But I've heard stories that of things coming out of the ocean, like UFOs. But I don't know anybody personally that can say for sure that happened to them, and I have never seen that myself.
So you've not seen odd lights in the distance? I mean, there's a lot of time on the water that's just black, and you haven't seen any other weird things out there that made you question, like, what could that be?
Oh, well, I mean, I saw that UFO that time off of the Queen Charlotte. So, yeah, that was strange.
Right.
And, but...
Not definitively scary, huh?
Yeah, but you know what?
Pretty scary, all right.
Unusual phenomena are not always scary. Yeah. I was on a ship one time, a tanker, and we were leaving Valdez loaded with North Slope crude, around 650,000 barrels. And my job at the time was to secure the deck for sea, to go and make sure all the everything's tied down and everything was tight and secured. And during the time we were finishing the loading, it had been a cold, clear winter night, and the aurora borealis was just unbelievable. But it was up in the sky, as you would normally think. But what was really strange is we were leaving that day in Valdez, or that night, I should say. All of a sudden, like a curtain descending on the ship, the aurora borealis was like attracted to the deck of the front part of our ship, and we were surrounded. We were covered with aurora borealis, and I was in the middle of it. So here I am out on deck, and I'm walking through this undulating green and blue and red, and it's almost like vibrating, and I hear this pow, psh, psh, almost like electric plasma or something. And the hair on my arms goes up, and it was very strange.
Wow.
But it was so surreal, and it was so beautiful that I was just in this. I was like wading through the Aurora Borealis, and
like it was alive.
It was like alive. Yeah, it's exactly what it was like.
Huh.
And it lasted about 20 minutes, and I don't know whether because we changed course and went into Valdez Arm or I don't know what, but it lifted back up and went back up into the sky where it normally is. But
how special!
That was the single most surreal moment of my life. When I was in that, it was like I felt this peace. It sounds strange, but really? I felt this peace that I had never felt before. It was sublime.
Really? I wonder why that would have been, though. I mean,
like embraced, like you're embraced by something special. Huh?
Yeah, but
it was. Like
I would think it'd be more of a freaked out thing because of the
No, it was beautiful. It was absolutely beautiful. It was sublime. It was.
That would make a nice book title, as "Embraced by the Aurora Borealis."
Yeah, that's true.
I guess.
It was beautiful. So it isn't always strange, scary things that happen at sea.
Yeah.
Jeez, that's gorgeous. Has that ever been reported to have happened to somebody before? I've never heard of it.
Well, there's been reports of the Aurora Borealis coming down on land with people. It's not an unusual occurrence. There's many anecdotes of people who live in northern climes walking there. They're snowshoeing out in the middle of the night, and all of a sudden, as they're going, it covers them. It's not only up in the sky, but I don't think I've ever heard anybody say that it happened on a ship that I saw that time. But I've read that it's happened ashore many times.
How lucky! Wow.
It was pretty cool. I have to
Captain,
admit.
let me ask you this. Captain, let me ask you this. Is piracy on the way up, or in the Caribbean, say, or other places?
Well, piracy has been with us, Kevin, for as long as there have been mariners going to sea. And it's no different now. Piracy is still occurring. I have to say that the hotspots, the hotspot was over in Somalia, off of Somalia, where Captain Phillips got abducted. And that used to be the hotspot, but international cooperation has changed things, and there's now military. The militaries of the world have been guarding merchant ships as they go through this area, and they've been thwarting the pirates. Now, the big piracy area now is in West Africa, in the oil fields of Nigeria, where an American, actually they're from Louisiana, an American captain and chief engineer for Edison Schwest were working down there on an oil field boat, and they got abducted by pirates. And over in the Malacca Strait now, that area was down in piracy for a while, but that's coming back up now. The area in Indonesia, Singapore, over there, that's coming back up. But there were 180 reported incidents worldwide of armed robbery and piracy, but everybody knows the insurance industry. It's kind of like in insurance when you get a fender bender. Depending on how bad it is, you may or may not report it to your insurance company. You might just take care of it on your own, or the person who bunks you might take care of it without going to the insurance. And that same thing happens on a ship. Armed robbery is piracy that's in close to land, in many times in territorial waters. Piracy is the same thing, the same armed attack, but it's offshore further. But piracy and armed robbery occur regularly and worldwide, and I believe personally that it's one thing that recreational boaters are not aware of. We have a friend who's a lawyer. He's a retired lawyer, and he told me, I'm going to go down to Mexico in my sailboat. I'm going to go down the coast from Seattle and cruise down and go down to Mexico and go down there for the winter.
Oh.
And I told him, I said, you better watch out for armed robbers, brother. And he goes, what do you mean? And I said, armed robbers, they love recreational boaters. They're great targets. And so they'll hit recreational boats. many boaters will have weapons, but most countries, many countries, don't allow the private ownership of weapons, and Mexico is one of them. So you can't declare your weapon when you're going in there, and the pirates know that, and the robbers know this. Jeez. So they'll take your weapon, your valuables, and if you're lucky, they'll leave you alive on the beach, and after taking your boat and all your stuff. So. So any of your listeners that have this great dream to go boating and to live the life at sea, I would say this: pick and choose your locations well. Have a good voyage plan, that people know where you're going to be going and where you're going to be expected, and finally go in a group. Don't, that's what I told him. Don't sit sitting there anchoring out on your own at night, waiting to move, to sail the next day out there by yourself. Get in a big group, go to a place where, maybe a port area where there's lots of people, and stick to that area when you're doing that, because piracy still exists, and armed robbery still exists as well.
Goodness, have you ever been in a situation that got like that?
Yeah, I was. As a matter of fact, I worked with the guy who was the first officer with Captain Phillips. I don't know if you guys saw the movie Captain Phillips with Tom Hanks, but the first officer who took over for Captain Phillips and became the captain when he was abducted was a guy named Shane Murphy, and I sailed with Shane Murphy on another tanker, and we were hit by pirates. We were hit by armed intruders off the coast of the Dominican Republic in the Caribbean. And it was on my watch, actually. And we were boarded. We had 2 armed guards with weapons that were patrolling the ship. And we were boarded right after midnight on Christmas Day. And one of the guards told me, he said, there's intruders on board, and they ran after him. And I wasn't the captain on that ship. I was filling in for a friend of mine.
Yeah.
And I called the captain who was a friend, and I said, "We've been boarded." And he goes, "Why don't you go back and check it out?" And I said, "What?" And we didn't have weapons on board. All I had was a huge pipe wrench. So I grabbed this pipe wrench in one hand and the radio in the other, and I'm making my way back. And all of a sudden I hear bam, pow, pow, pow. And there's a gunfight in the back deck.
Oh gosh.
And I ducked and wanted to make sure, I wasn't armed. And the 2 guards got into a shootout with the pirates, and the upshot of it was that there was one pirate that had his head blown off, and he was floating in the water at the base of the ship, and the others got away.
Oh,
brother.
Man.
So that's, yes, the Pirates of the Caribbean still exist, and actually they always have. But you know what? I bet you guys don't know. You got to watch a sailor. We love telling stories, but the most.
Well, I tell you what, we're coming just about up to our. Well, Captain, I don't mean to interrupt, but we're coming to our last break, and we'll be right back.
Okay.
I want to ask you about Donald Trump too. We'll have a few issues.
Okay. Well, I was going to tell you about
rogue waves, whirlpools. I mean, this isn't the regular stuff. This is not regular stuff.
That's true enough. Life at sea.
Now, which one qualifies as your scariest moment out on the sea?
Okay, for me, the most scared I ever was, I was on a automobile carrier, carrying Toyotas and Lexuses, basically 5,000 of them, from Toyohashi, Japan, to the U.S. And we hit a severe winter storm in the Aleutian Islands. And that it was gusts to 120 miles an hour, and we had 40 to 50-foot seas. And we're talking basically a big floating parking lot of all these cars. And what you never and your dad was right, Kevin, when you were talking about your dad and how he kept his bow into the wave. That's the best way to handle bad weather. Is you basically want to have it off your bow a little bit, but you want to head into it. You don't want the waves, if at all possible. The last resort that you want is to have the waves broadside, what we call broadside, which means coming to you on your side, hitting you on one side or the other directly.
Sure.
Well, that's what happened to us. The third officer allowed the ship, I was the second officer, the third officer allowed the ship to swing too much. The wind caught us. And the next thing you know, we're broadside of the wind. A 45 or 50-foot wave came in right next. Wham! It hit us right in the middle. And we're talking a ship that's two football fields long, 660 feet. It hit us and it buckled the hull. Like, it buckled the hole like if you had drunk a soda can, like a Coca-Cola can, and held it with each hand and just crinkled the can with your hand. That's what it did to our ship. It put a big crease in the side of the ship, and then the thing started moving back and forth. And you know what happens after you work it for a little while? You're going to get a hole in that can. And that's what was going to happen to us. There was going to be 33-degree green seawater coming in, flooding the ship, sinking us, killing us all, and there's no way that anybody was going to rescue us in 120-knot winds and 45-foot seas.
Oh, gosh.
So the last thing I remember down below, the engineers were getting ready to weld a plate on the inside to keep it from moving. I went up to the bridge where the captain had relieved the third mate and was on the wheel himself trying to right that ship back. And for 24 hours, he fought that thing back and forth, trying to get us, where we were righted. All that time, I was carrying my survival suit with me.
I bet.
And I thought it was really going to be the end. I was going to call my wife on the satellite phone. We had a satellite phone on. I was really going to call her and say, I love you, but I think this is going to be the end of it. And but luckily, we got righted, and we limped into port, and it turned out to be okay, and I lived to tell the tale. But for that amount of time, I knew that there was no way we were going to be rescued. There's no way we could be saved, and that I had to face the possibility that I might end up dying that night. And it was a sobering thought.
I bet. Goodness. Hey, with the last name like Sweeney, is there anything else you really could have done with your life? I don't think so. I mean, this is...
I could have been a barber, Sweeney Todd, the barber of Seville.
There you go, because I'm like, Sweeney, Captain Sweeney, it just goes, it just flows. I just had to tell you that.
Sweeney's a good maritime name, that's true.
Yeah.
Captain, did you know I'm a direct descendant of Captain James Cook?
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, direct descendant. Yeah. Matter of fact, if you look at an oil painting of me, he looks kind of like me.
Interesting. Well, I hope, Kevin, that you end up a little better than Captain Cook ended up.
Well, fooling with the native women, everything would have been fine.
I thought you were related to Captain Hook, not Captain Cook.
Don't anger the native wherever you go. And as merchant mariners, we learned this early on.
Yeah. Well, see, that's what happened, Heidi, is the island of Tonga, I think it was, they were all horsing around with the native women. The natives got restless, and they killed them. But he had a good life till then, though. But now, Captain, let me ask you. Well, let me ask you this, though. How would a fellow become a mariner? For the listening audience, how would they do that? To go into the profession these days is not like the days of Joseph Conrad and sailing ships where you just walk down to the dock and you hire on as a crew member on some vessel. The Coast Guard controls our documentation and our licensing. And so there's really, regardless of how anybody enters into the business, you're going to have to expect to pay money and take classes. And if you want to go entry level, if somebody wants to go entry level, it takes about 6 months. There's basic classes you have to take, and then you have to apply to the Coast Guard to obtain your credential. And that's just to work as a basic entry level position, washing dishes or something like that. And then for those who want to go further into the business, they have 1- and 2-year programs and apprenticeships that community colleges. There's one in community college, one in Seattle, for example, where people can go and you start up higher than entry level, but it takes longer and it costs you more money. And then if you really want to get into the profession and make it a career like I did, there's 4-year colleges. There's one in Maine, a number of them on the East Coast. The one I went to was in California. The Great Lakes has a 2-year program. Yeah. The Great Lakes Maritime Academy that you can go to and come out as an officer, a deck or engine officer, and start up higher up. And that's the route I chose. But first of all, it's not easy. I mean, you got to go through college for 4 years. But the other thing is that it's very expensive. I know a kid down the street. Now, of course, we live in Washington. He wanted to go to my alma mater, California Maritime Academy, or the California State University Maritime College is what it's called officially. But out-of-state tuition for him for 4 years was going to probably run about $170,000. Oh, good.
But then again, when you graduate, you can pay that back in 2 years working at sea. So We get paid well, but it's not easy to get into the profession. But that's the ways they break in now, Kevin. Is you can't just go down there and say, okay, I'd like to join.
So I got offered a pretty good deal then to be started as third mate and then be captain in a year, I guess. That was.
You certainly did. And back in the day, that was a good way to go. But that doesn't happen anymore with the credentialing and the requirements, the training requirements and schooling requirements that the Coast Guard has mandated. People can.
Well, that was several decades ago.
Coming up through the hawspipe is tough.
Well, that was several decades ago. So let me ask you this: what has Trump done with his OBP decision? Is it or?
Well, I haven't been happy with President Trump as a Mariner from a Mariner's point of view. For one thing, he allowed exemptions to the Jones Act, which requires American ships carry whatever they need to be carried from American port to American port. His administration allowed many more exemptions to that. And the biggest thing was that at the end of the last administration, there was a announcement by the Customs and Border Patrol that a loophole, a huge legal loophole that allows foreign mariners to be working in the Gulf of Mexico waters, they were going to eliminate that loophole. And this cost Americans thousands and thousands of jobs. Anyway, when the current administration took over, they rescinded that proposal. And so now, and with the Gulf of Mexico is really hurting maritime-wise as far as employment, with the price of oil being low, at a time when we really could have used, 4,000 or 5,000 maritime jobs on these vessels, the current administration allows this loophole and the foreign mariners to still work there. So as a friend of mine, a captain who's unemployed and looking for work, told me, he goes, well, I guess making America great again doesn't apply to the U.S. Merchant Marine. And
wow.
I guess it doesn't. That's terrible.
That's something you don't hear very often.
Yeah, we've been very disappointed. The Maritime has been very disappointed.
Yeah.
Well, that's really bizarre. Well, now I want to, before we let you go, Captain, I've enjoyed the heck out of it. But now your website is maritimeheadhunters.com.
Yeah, our business that my wife and I run is maritimeheadhunters.com. It's a maritime job placement and counseling service that we have. But I still have an active license, and I still do pick and choose. But I still am available to do relief work at sea, filling in for people. I'm not going to do it full time anymore. I'm past that time of my career. Yeah. But I still have a current license, and I'm still available to fill in offshore. And I write, as you mentioned, for the biggest maritime magazine that deals with professional mariners, called Professional Mariner. And I have my own column in there and have for 10 years. And the readers can go to professionalmariner.com, and they can click on a Mariner's Notebook, and they'll see my picture. And then they have an archive of my articles. They can go all the way back to 2008 and check out all the articles that I've written about current topics that affect mariners. And of course, this one that I, with the current administration, was a topic of one of my articles not too long ago. And see what I have written over the past 10 years. And I also have, as you mentioned, the book From the Bridge.
Yeah.
People can get that at Amazon, From the Bridge, Authentic Modern Sea Stories, which is not some work of fiction. This is my own experience at sea. And even though it's on a slow bell, but thanks to my wife, I am beginning to start the second volume of that. I'm not there yet, but when I do, I'll make sure I get a hold of you and we can talk about it.
Well, please do, and I've enjoyed it immensely, and
Me too.
We'll send you a link to the show, and I guess we better sail off into the night ourselves, but I've enjoyed it.
I understand, my friend.
Yeah, thank you, Captain.
I certainly enjoyed it. And I wish all of you and all the listeners out there smooth sailing till we talk again.
Awesome. You take care. It was awesome chatting with you.
Good night. Good night. Good night.